She knew the names everyone repeats: Hitler, Himmler, Mengele. But in the shadows were others. Doctors who turned medicine into a weapon, officers who engineered hope to make death easier, and bureaucrats who killed with paper and ink. These are the worst Nazis you've never heard of. Perhaps the greatest lie about Nazism is believing we already know who the worst were. She knew the world remembered names like Hitler, Himmler, Mengele, but those were just the store windows. In the archives almost no one dares to open, there are others: men who killed without getting their hands dirty, doctors who turned medicine into a tool of silent mutilation, and bureaucrats who wiped out entire cities with nothing but paper and stamps. And the most disturbing part is that many of them lived for decades after the war, hidden in plain sight. She knew that telling this story wasn't just revisiting crimes, but exposing minds that believed they were shaping a better world according to their twisted logic. They imagined a future free of imperfections and saw people as defective parts in a machine. What's frightening is not only what they did, but the clarity with which they planned every step, as if each life were just a variable in an impersonal equation. Before continuing, she takes a breath and faces the audience as if holding a forbidden document. This channel is close to hitting an important milestone, and every subscription is what allows us to keep uncovering stories they don't want you to know. If you subscribe now, you're not just a number. You're an ally in this mission to expose what's been hidden for decades. She leans over the archive table, flipping through pages that creak under the weight of years. We begin with a man who didn't want to kill quickly. He wanted to erase a people's future, and he found a way to do it without them realizing it. Before we move on, there's something important you should know. We're very close to reaching our subscriber goal, and once we do, we'll release a special video, something we've never done before on this channel. It's going to be deep, revealing historical connections that rarely make it to the public eye. So, if you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. Your click is part of making this happen, and will help bring this next episode to life. She leaned over the yellowed medical file, the firm handwriting of Schumann still looking fresh. He didn't see himself as an executioner, but as a social engineer. For him, killing quickly was inefficient. The real goal was to erase a people's ability to reproduce, creating a future where certain groups would simply vanish. He envisioned the world as a blueprint for biological architecture, where only the ideal elements would remain. Inside makeshift barracks, Schumann built what looked like legitimate clinics. Guards escorted men and women to examinations, while technicians adjusted X-ray machines that, in practice, were instruments of internal mutilation. The victims believed they were receiving treatment, but left condemned to slow, irreversible suffering. He recorded everything: dosage, exposure times, age, sex, physical condition. They weren't people, they were test units. What set Schumann apart from other Reich doctors was his methodical coldness. He knew the cooperation of his victims was essential to keep operations efficient. So he perfected the medical theater, pristine lab coats, sterilized instruments, forged certificates to be shown to families. This staging wasn't just to deceive, it was to study how hope decayed when confronted with truth. His notes describe the exact moment prisoners realized they had been deceived, and how that realization could be manipulated to extract more psychological data. Schumann designed portable machines capable of taking his method to other camps, turning sterilization into a mobile, scalable process. In his mind, this was a technical achievement comparable to advances in industrial engineering. When the Reich collapsed, he vanished as if he had rehearsed the escape. False identities, safe routes, and a post-war life as a respected physician in other countries. To his new patients, he was just a competent doctor, to history, one of the most discreet and effective architects of human mutilation. She turned the page and found the name of a man who understood that uncontrolled fear could hinder mass killing. Franz Stangl saw efficiency as the highest virtue. For him, chaos reduced productivity. His solution wasn't more violence, but more control. Control disguised as normality. He believed the best way to lead thousands to their deaths was to give them a sense of safety until the very last moment. In the camps of Sobibor and Treblinka, Stangl built meticulously crafted settings. Replicas of railway stations with frozen clocks, painted signs, and fake ticket counters received trains full of deportees. Carefully maintained gardens, music played by improvised orchestras, guards with neutral expressions. Nothing that resembled imminent execution. The environment was choreographed so that victims believed they were merely passing through, awaiting the next stage of work. This theater served a precise function: to maintain order and prevent any mass reaction. Families were separated gradually, with plausible explanations. Children were taken away under the promise of reuniting with their parents. Elderly people were led to special medical treatments. Young men were told to prepare for important tasks. Everything was designed to prevent the truth from being perceived too soon. The most unsettling aspect was his ability to train subordinates to replicate the method. He created procedural manuals that resembled corporate reports, with workflow charts and performance metrics. Words like execution or death never appeared, only administrative terms that turned genocide into an operational task. These guides produced a corps of officers capable of applying the same system in other camps, multiplying its reach. After the war, Stangl lived for years in Brazil, working as a mechanic, surrounded by neighbors who had no idea about his past. For him, what he had done wasn't monstrous, but simply the efficient execution of a job. This perception, that he was merely fulfilling an administrative duty, is what reveals the danger of his mind: the ability to turn killing into a clean, repeatable, emotionless process. She comes across a report stamped "Confidential," signed by Kurt Blom. A physician by training, but a strategist by vocation, he wasn't interested solely in curing or killing. He wanted to understand how disease could become a tool of domination. For Blom, biological warfare was most effective when the enemy remained alive long enough to suffer, spread fear, and destabilize entire communities. He envisioned a world where an invisible agent could conquer more territory than any army. In the research centers under his command, prisoners were infected with diseases like typhus, cholera, and plague. But it wasn't just about observing physical decline. He documented behavioral changes, shifts in mood, moral collapse. Blom understood that disease eroded not only the body, but also the ability to think and resist. Many victims thanked him, believing they were part of experiments to save lives, when in reality, they were pieces in a study of psychological destruction. His plan extended far beyond the concentration camps. Documents reveal he proposed contaminating water supplies, releasing infected insects, and developing airborne weapons capable of spreading epidemics over civilian areas. There were no moral boundaries in his calculations. Populations were treated as logistical targets. For him, each death was simply proof that his theory worked. When the Reich fell, Blom did not vanish like others. His expertise attracted the interest of secret programs in the early Cold War. Portions of his research were classified and incorporated into other nations' biological weapons projects. A man who had carried out lethal experiments in captivity now moved in diplomatic and academic circles, shielded by the strategic value of his knowledge. The most disturbing part wasn't what he did during the war. It was the fact that, even after the Nazi collapse, his work continued to serve governments willing to overlook his past. She leafs through administrative records that look like factory inventories, but each line represents lives taken. Odilo Globoknik didn't just oversee the killing of over 1.5 million people. He turned murder into a profitable system. For him, death was not the end of the process, but the beginning of a chain of exploitation. Everything was accounted for: gold from teeth, human hair, clothing sorted by color and size, even orthopedic prosthetics. His goal was to extract maximum value from every victim before eliminating them. Globoknik structured extermination camps as production centers. There were departments for transportation, sorting, storage, and disposal, each with specific functions and its own hierarchy. This fragmentation allowed many workers to either not realize or pretend not to realize the role they played in the whole. A clerk counting uniforms could convince himself he wasn't involved in killing, even though his work was an indispensable part of the machinery. His most dangerous skill was creating a self-sustaining system. Even when he wasn't present, the process continued to operate with the same efficiency. He trained subordinates to replicate the methods, standardizing procedures that could be implemented in other camps. This franchise of death extended his reach far beyond the sites he directly controlled. The coldest detail was his attention to accounting. Documents recovered after the war show detailed balance sheets listing the value of each shipment of looted goods, with calculations converting human suffering into exact figures. Hair was cleaned, sorted, and sent to factories. Gold was melted down and shipped to the Reich. Clothing was redistributed to German soldiers or civilians. Nothing was wasted, because, in Globoknik's view, every body was a resource to be exploited to the fullest. Captured by the British in 1945, Globoknik took his own life before facing trial. His records, however, revealed not just the scale of the crime, but the mindset that drove it. The belief that efficiency and profit justified any act, including mass extermination. She reads the pages of a diary, aged and stained, where every line reveals the inner struggle of a man who believed he was saving his people. Adam Chernyakov, head of the Jewish Council in the Warsaw Ghetto, was not a Nazi. He was a Jewish engineer and politician, placed at the center of a meticulously built trap. The Germans knew that to maintain order and avoid resistance, they needed someone respected, someone who inspired trust, and Chernyakov believed that through cooperation, he could reduce suffering. At first, this illusion seemed to have some foundation. Small concessions were made, partial deliveries of medical supplies, slight increases in food rations, permission to keep schools and cultural programs running. But each apparent victory carried a hidden cost. The very structures meant to preserve the community, schools, hospitals, administrative records, became perfect tools for Nazi control. What was once a school roster became a deportation list. What was once a patient registry became a catalog of the weak and infirm. Chernyakov did not initially realize he was helping to build the very system that would allow the ghetto's destruction with administrative precision. When deportations began, he was told they were merely transfers to labor camps. Forged documents and detailed explanations maintained the deception. Believing cooperation could save lives, he used his authority to keep people calm and avoid uprisings, unaware that he was organizing the logistics of extermination. As deportations increased and rumors about the camps grew clearer, the weight of truth began to crush him. The diary shows a man trying to reconcile impossible decisions, caught between hope and the certainty that he had been manipulated. On the day he was ordered to sign another deportation list, including children, Chernyakov swallowed cyanide. His death was a final act of refusal, but the system he had helped construct continued to function, now without him. She looks at the photographs. Thin bodies, skin clinging to bone, eyes half shut in agony. Sigmund Rascher didn't see himself as an ordinary executioner. In his mind, he was a scientist of precision, someone decoding the secret limits of human endurance. His goal wasn't to kill quickly, but to understand how far the body and mind could be pushed before breaking. He believed every groan, every desperate gasp concealed a scientific answer. In his high-altitude experiments, Rascher placed prisoners inside decompression chambers, simulating extreme Luftwaffe flights. He watched blood pressure drop, eyes roll back, consciousness fade. Every detail was noted as if he were an engineer analyzing the failure of a machine under strain. Some subjects were revived, only to be subjected to the same process again and again until there was nothing left to record. His hypothermia studies followed the same cold logic. Prisoners were immersed in freezing water for hours. While he timed the exact moment, clarity vanished. The true horror came afterward. The rewarming methods were as painful as the freezing. Heat lamps, hot baths, even body-to-body contact were tested. Every reaction measured with clinical detachment. To him, this wasn't cruelty, but the gathering of data. Perhaps most disturbing is that, unlike other Nazi doctors, Rascher didn't frame his work in ideology. It was, to him, a technical mission in service of military aviation. That didn't stop his records from being valued even after the war. Some of the data collected at Dachau was later used by Allied researchers, creating an ethical dilemma that still lingers today. To what extent can knowledge obtained through torture ever be legitimized? She had imagined mass death coming with gunfire or explosions, but Herbert Backe proved none of that was necessary. To him, hunger was a silent, invisible, and, above all, efficient weapon. He saw war not just as a clash of armies, but as a contest for absolute control over life's essential resources. At the center of his vision stood the Hunger Plan, a cold calculation that turned wheat fields and rail networks into instruments of mass killing. Backe believed the Reich's dream of living space could only be secured if millions were removed through deprivation. His thinking was administrative, not to kill directly, but to strip entire regions of food, redirecting it to supply the German army and the Reich's population. He viewed the map of Europe like a game board where grain, livestock, and harvests were pieces to be moved so that some would eat and others would vanish slowly. Records reveal the precision with which Backe engineered this induced scarcity. He knew exactly how many calories were required to keep a population alive and how many days it would take to bring it to collapse. Entire Eastern European cities were cut off from supplies, while trains loaded with food rolled past them on the way to Berlin. To him, there was no cruelty in this, only strategic efficiency. The effect was devastating. Within months, entire rural communities withered. Children lost the strength to walk, the elderly lay motionless in makeshift beds, and families traded whatever they had for crumbs of bread. What Backe didn't see, or chose not to, was that his plan not only erased lives, it dismantled the social fabric of entire regions. Hunger made neighbors compete, parents choose which child to feed, dissolving any sense of community long before the final death arrived. She knew that the official history, the one repeated in books and courtrooms, revealed only a fraction of what truly happened. Behind the scenes, men and women like Schumann, Stengel, Blom, Globoknik, Rascher, Backe, and Brandt shaped the coldest, most silent machinery of the Third Reich. They were not the faces of fiery speeches or grand parades, but architects of methods, administrators of death, specialists who turned ideology into procedure and murder into routine. What bound them together was not simply cruelty, but the ability to detach emotionally from the outcome. Each, in their own way, believed they were fulfilling a necessary function. Schumann saw mass sterilization as a technical experiment. Stangl believed order and efficiency were virtues even in killing. Blom treated the human body as a laboratory for biological weapons. Globoknik saw economic value in every destroyed life. Rascher reduced human pain to endurance charts. Baca used administrative calculations to decide who would starve, and Brandt wrapped murder in the aesthetics of medicine. In the end, the most unsettling realization was that the system worked precisely because these names were not in the spotlight. Operating in the margins, they could refine their methods without the pressure of public scrutiny. The real lesson she took away was that the danger does not lie only in charismatic leaders and radical ideologues, but also in competent technicians who apply their expertise with cold precision, believing they serve a higher purpose. Away from the glare of attention, they held near absolute control over their domains. And decades later, traces of their innovations can still be found in studies, manuals, and even policies that were never fully exposed. This shadow, made of methods and ideas, outlived them all. And perhaps that is the most disturbing aspect of all. She closes her eyes and realizes the faces change, but the structures remain. What those men and women created was not just new ways to kill, but proof that evil can wear a lab coat, sign spreadsheets, speak in a calm voice, and even save a few lives just to keep the others under control. That is what makes their legacy so dangerous. The ability to hide behind a legitimate role while every decision quietly ends a life. And perhaps the most unsettling truth is that, even decades later, these mechanisms still exist in other contexts, other countries, other ideologies. She understands that telling these stories is not about reliving the past, but recognizing the traces it left in the present. Because if history has shown anything, it's that the worst are not always the most visible. And by the time they finally are, it may already be too late. Subscribe now to fully understand the context of that time, and click on the video on your screen to uncover more details and connections that weren't revealed here.